It was the evening of September 4th, 1878, and two sisters, Jane and Esther Cox, did their nightly preparations and went to bed. They shared a modest room on the second floor of their family home at 6 Princess Street in Amherst. Jane fell asleep quickly, but Esther, still suffering the pain of a recent heartache, tossed and turned in her bed. A strange scratching noise snapped her out of her state of self-pity. Jane, wake up, whispered her sister. Listen. The cardboard box that they used for storing scraps of fabric and spools of thread was bouncing up and down, as if a mouse was stuck inside the sewing kit. Jane yanked the lid off the box. There was nothing unusual inside, just spools of thread and a few scraps of fabric. Rushing into the room, Daniel Teed, their brother-in-law, thought that this was a sign they were going to hell.
Esther Cox was a young woman of about the age of 18 who was living here on Princess Street in Amherst with her older sister, her sister's husband, and her siblings. And Esther, about that time in 1878, started to have some very strange paranormal experiences while in the home there with her sister.
The next night, September 5th, a few minutes after she had gone to bed, Jane was awakened by the sound of Esther screaming. Trembling with fear, Esther just kept repeating over and over, "I'm dying, I'm dying." Esther was in a troubled state. The entire household gathered at her bedside once again. "I'm dying!" The young woman seemed to have lost her mind. She kept repeating unintelligible words and shaking her head as if she was possessed. Suddenly, a loud bang like a clap of thunder shook the entire house. Esther crumpled on her bed and fell into a deep sleep, as if nothing had happened.
The family didn't know what was happening, so they called upon doctors, and eventually they called upon ministers and priests to come and help, and no one seemed to be able to help her. She was ill a lot of the time, but it would come and go.
The next morning, the town physician, Dr. Prt1, came to examine Esther, who was still in bed running a high fever. He thought she was merely suffering from a slight nervous depression. He was less surprised by his patient's health than he was by the pillow being moved by an invisible hand.
Dr. Prt1, who was the family doctor, came over to visit Esther because she'd been swelling up and claiming she was burning up. And so while he was there in the house, blankets were flying off the bed, pillows were flying out from under her head, and the whole family was gathered around.
He came and saw these kinds of experiences and had no answer to them. He went several times and in fact later signed affidavits actually saying what he saw, that he heard strange voices, that he saw things happen in the house. And he could not explain the medical problems that she was having at the time. So there's good documentation of that.
After that, things took a turn for the worse. Marks appeared on the wall just above Esther Cox's head, marks that began to form letters, then eventually shaped into words.
And then all of a sudden they heard this scraping sound on the wall above Esther's bed, and they looked up, and the description that I read said that it was as though someone were using an iron spike to carve into a calcimined wall, and they looked, and the words that were being carved into the wall were, "Esther Cox, you are mine to kill."
It wasn't something that happened while Esther was alone. It happened when there was a number of people in the room, and it scared everyone. It scared the whole town, and eventually the newspapers started writing the accounts of the incidents, and news travels fast in a small town.
Overnight, the house on Princess Street became the subject of curiosity for all of Cumberland County. Rumors were spreading like wildfire in Amherst. What if Esther Cox is possessed?
A number of things started happening around the house. Knives began to fly around the kitchen. Furniture started overturning. And again, all these noises and all these sounds. And they felt like they lived in a haunted house. But when Esther would leave the house, everything would stop. And eventually they discovered that they didn't live in a haunted house, but that it was Esther herself who was a haunted girl.